Today we are wrapping up Daniel, the series that we have been in with Daniel chapter 12. If you want to follow along in the blue Bibles that you can find around the sanctuary, it's page 1393. We'll get you to Daniel chapter 12. It's a shorter passage today. Last week, chapter 11 was quite lengthy. So we're going to read the whole thing today. But before we do, I want to talk to you about some delicious words. You ever tried to order one of these sandwiches? Do you know how to say it? Gyro, some say. You ever hear somebody order a gyro? Yeah? I've heard it pronounced euro, gyro, hero. It's funny because every time I order, and I love these sandwiches, every time I order, I always ask the person behind the counter, what's the right way to say it? And I've been told by multiple vendors, it don't matter as long as you're ordering the sandwich. They just say it however you want. We know what you mean. It's fine. So, you ever try to order one of these? A bowl? They look delicious, but sometimes I'm intimidated because I don't know how to say the word, so I order something else. I've heard this pronounced akai, ACI, a chia. I've heard it pronounced a number of ways, and I'm not willing to dare, so I've never had one. I'm too intimidated by trying to pronounce that word, so I just stay away from it. I'm sure they're healthy, but, so are mashed potatoes. Equally, it's a vegetable. I've been thinking a lot as we've gone through this series on biblical prophecy of just that sometimes when you are introduced to this genre of literature of biblical prophecy, if you don't know what to do with it, it can be very intimidating. I love owning a home. CJ and I have not had a home in 14 years. And when we found out that we were coming to Twin, one of the things we were so excited about is the possibility, my wife's a gardener. And her plants have all been in pots for 14 years. They've been on our patios and on our windowsills. And the idea of actually getting plants in the ground for dirt that you can cultivate with your hand was so exciting. But one of the things I didn't know about southern Idaho is that you also come with in-ground irrigation systems. If you've never lived in a place that has in-ground irrigation systems, they're a little more complicated than you would think than pressing a button and then the water comes on. So last spring, it was time, when we first moved here, and then in the winter they come and they blow out all the water and they seal it up and they turn it and they do all this stuff to help winterize it. And then in the spring, they don't come back and turn it back on. That's your job as the homeowner. So I find myself standing out in my front yard going, well, I'm sure the on switch is around here somewhere. And I had to look around, and finally, I figured out, somebody said it's probably in the ground. One of my neighbors said it's probably in the ground. So I started pulling off all these covers, but each one, there's like a solenoid in this one, and there's a timer in this one. And finally, I found this big tube that goes about 5 feet down under my lawn, and it has a sprinkler nozzle way at the bottom of the hole. So I'm staring down at it, and I have long arms, but not that long. So I'm reaching down like I'm shoulder deep in my lawn trying to reach to turn on my sprinkler system. And so then my neighbor, who's very helpful with suggestions, said there's probably like a wrench thing, like a long wrench thing you gotta find. Thanks. So now I'm wandering around my house, looking everywhere I can think of for some long wrench thing. And finally in the garage, the only thing that I could find, it looked like a very, very extended fork. And I said, maybe that's what I'm looking for. So I finally get it, and I turn it on. The problem is, on the corner of my house, there's this thing with a lid on it, and every time I would turn the water on, the water would come out of the lid, so I'd keep turning it off because it was like overflowing. And then my very helpful neighbor helped me to understand, no, that's how it's supposed to work. That's a good thing. So you have to let it build up the pressure, and it overflows at first, and then it caps itself. It's actually like a built-in safety device. And I gotta admit, as I have been preparing this Daniel sermon series, I keep thinking about how disoriented and uneducated I felt about in-ground irrigation systems, because I think that's how a lot of people feel about biblical prophecy. They'll like try and read it and go, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do with this. So let's read it together, and I think we can get through this. We're in Daniel chapter 12. At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress such as has not happened from the beginning of the nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, close up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there before me stood two others. Remember, we talked about two as the number of witness. So in the poetic language of Scripture, two is always the number of witness. One on this bank of the river and one on the opposite bank. One of them said to the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, how long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled? The man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river lifted his right hand and his left hand towards heaven. And I heard him swear by him who lives forever, saying, it will be for a time, a times, and half a time, when the powers of the holy people have been finally broken, all these things will happen. If you remember in Daniel chapter 9, the prophecy of the 70 weeks, we talked about this poetic formulation of a time, which is a year, times, which is 2 years, and half a time. So this is a 3.5 year period that the author is looking for. I heard but did not understand, so I asked, my Lord, what will be the outcome of all this be? He replied, go your way, Daniel, because the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end. Many will be purified, made spotless and refined, but the wicked will continue to be wicked. None of the wicked will understand, but those who are wise will understand. From the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination that caused desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Blessed be the 1,290 days. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1,335 days. As for you, go your way till the end. You will rest, and then at the end of the days, you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance. Some people read passages like this and they get great hope from it. We will overcome. God will deliver us. Brighter days are ahead. Other people read passages like this and they sound ominous. That darkness is coming, that a cloud will cover the land, that devastation is on the horizon. And what's funny is both of those things are contained within the text of scriptures like this. That it is both the intimidating and overwhelming sense of what you're up against, and also that within that, we are to be a people of hope, who persevere and overcome, who are faithful to the things we know are right, because right will be on our side. And both of those things are intertwined together. If it were one or the other, it would be so much simpler to both read passages like this and to preach through books like Daniel. As we started into this journey in Daniel chapter 1, we learned that this small band of educated or upper class elites had been taken out of their homeland and moved from Israel, moved all the way over into Babylon, into a captivity. And there was a resistance narrative built in, that there was this heart of saying, just because you beat us up, tied us up, and took us away, doesn't mean we're going to conform to your ways and become like you. And so it started with food, as most resistance movements do. It started about something as simple as food. And Daniel and his cohort of young people said, hold on a second. We're not going to eat all the rich food and drink all the rich wine that the others in the king's court do. Let us do an experiment for 10 days. Let us eat vegetables and drink water, and then evaluate us, because we're betting we come out better on the other side if we don't compromise our kosher or food standards, and we stick with what we have been called to do. So it started in Daniel chapter 1. And then we migrated through a whole bunch of other stories about not bowing to a golden idol that had been erected by the ruler, and that being called religious persecution and getting thrown into a fiery furnace. But believing and persevering through that trial, and then finding in the midst of the furnace the presence of a guardian spirit. We wandered from there and we ended up in a lion's den for very similar reasons, but with a very similar outcome. And safety in the midst of this ominous danger and threat. And then the book transitioned a little bit as we got into Daniel 7, into these odd Bible prophecies that we've been making our way through and trying to discern what we're supposed to get out of them. So I just want to, in conclusion, as we wrap up Daniel, I just want to ask sort of the big picture question that we've been asking. We know that the book of Daniel is set in the 600s BCE in Babylon. But we've also been entertaining a theory that the book was actually written about 400 years later, in the 200s, not about a Babylonian captivity, but about a military occupancy that who we know as the Greeks, like Alexander the Great, had actually conquered, and that this is written in a subversive kind of imagery, and that the book is actually better understood as literature of the oppressed when you don't have the freedom of speech and can't say whatever you want, like down with this clown. You can't say that. And so you write about some heroes, some heroic young people centuries ago in a land far away, and you make them sort of these honorary heroes that we can model ourselves on. But what you're really doing is trying to inspire the young people who are reading it in your time, your audience. You're trying to inspire that kind of courage and resistance in them to spark their imagination. Issues like this often get very contentious. So there are two things that I have found that I think really help us find a way forward. The third, anytime I'm presented with an either or option, like Republican or Democrat, creation or evolution, right? Liberal or conservative. Whenever I'm presented at capitalism versus socialism, right? Anytime I'm presented with two options, I find it very helpful to say, is there a third voice? Is there anything else in the story besides these two things? And I have yet to not find a third perspective. Because sometimes the third perspective is to draw a Venn diagram and see where these two things agree. Okay, can we find any commonality? But sometimes you have to go outside the system and say, is anyone else doing this in a completely different way at all? And here, I find it very helpful that I come from a background that viewed this text, wasn't concerned whether it was in the 6th century where it's set or in the 2nd century where scholarship thinks it is, but that it actually was written about the future and maybe even our time. And just having that third perspective of a futurism, that this might be about the end of this era, our days, helps me to get out of the either or option. The second thing that it allows me to do is ask the very simple question of application. What do we do with a text like this? With all of its odd imagery and its numbers, like I don't want to do math, you know? Like what am I supposed to do with this? So let me ask you a question. 1,290 days. Anybody good at math want to tell me how long of a period that is? About 3.5 years. Turns out it's the same poetic language, this is a mathematical presentation, as a time, times, and half a time. Same thing. One of the reasons that's helpful to me is that when I ask, what am I supposed to do? What are we as a congregation supposed to do with a text like this? Is that I find that whether you think it was written when it was set in the 600 BCEs, or that it's a way of writing, but that it was actually written to an audience about 200 BCE, or it's actually about the times we possibly find ourselves in and the end of this era of being organized this way in the world. No matter which of the three lenses you read this text through, it turns out the application is exactly the same. In all three cases, the message is exactly the same, and it's this. Things change. This thing we find ourselves in is going to last about 3.5 years. So be the kind of person that you hope you are in 3.5 years. Be that person today. Be faithful to your calling. And believe that if you are right, that right will guard you and lead you on. It doesn't matter when it was written. It doesn't matter the lens through which you read it. The heart of this passage is exactly the same. Don't give up. Don't give in. Don't compromise your convictions. Be faithful to the one who called you, and trust, believe that brighter days are ahead. Can you hear that word today? Don't give up. Don't give in. Don't compromise your convictions. Be faithful to your calling and believe that brighter days are ahead. And that's Daniel. Amen? Okay.